whether he is defrauding banks about the value of his real estate holdings or convincing his most loyal supporters to pay for his legal bills. Donald Trump has usually found a way to get other people to pick up the tab for him. But now, for the first time, he is facing accountability for his scheming right here in New York, the state that bore the brunt of his chicanery for decades. And so it is fitting that the person who helped put all of this in motion, the investigation that led to this landmark $450 million ruling against Donald Trump, was a congresswoman from New York. It was 5 years ago when Donald Trump's fixer, Michael Cohen, was called up to Capitol Hill to testify about his former boss. A lot of the questioning focused on Trump's racism and his hush money payments and his potential ties to Russia during the 2016 campaign. But when newly elected Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was called on, she focused on a relatively obscure part of Donald Trump's business dealings.
To your knowledge, did the president ever provide inflated assets to an insurance company?
Yes.
Who else knows that the president did this?
Alan Weisselberg, Ron Lieberman, and Matthew Calamari.
And where would the committee find more information on this? Do you think we need to review his financial statements and his tax returns in order to compare them?
Yes, and you'd find it at the Trump org.
That moment set in motion a line of inquiry that led to the order today, filed a few hours ago. And now Donald Trump has just 30 days to pay the state of New York nearly $500 million and counting. Joining me now to discuss is Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She represents, of course, the 14th District of New York. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Great to see you in person, no less. So my first is just, it's amazing watching that tape. And I wonder if, you know, that was your freshman year.
Yeah, one of my first hearings as well.
Did you ever imagine that that line of inquiry would lead to the moment we find ourselves in now?
I mean, I don't think anybody saw the scale and the degree of this ruling that has come down. But I think even when Donald Trump was first running in 2016, people did say nobody knows Donald Trump like New Yorkers do. Yeah. And he had such a notorious reputation for this kind of shady dealing in construction, in real estate, in contracting, famous for not really paying out his contracts and fleecing working people all across New York City. We knew him as a fraud for longer and better than almost anybody else in the country. And really that line of questioning that we just saw was inspired by Trump Links, which is right by the bridge that connects the Bronx and Queens, which is the borough that the two boroughs that I represent. And I drive across that bridge all the time, you know, going from family to family, visiting in the community. And that also was built using a public-private land deal. And so we know that there are so many of these shady dealings that are going on. And not only was this just an example of Donald Trump, defrauding for his own personal enrichment, but also fleecing the working people of New York City in order to enrich himself.
Yeah, we never have enough time. But that you begin that line of questioning or ended it talking about driving by that golf course. And it sounds like the Trump name became almost talismanic, representative of this inequity, this two-tiered system, everything that's kind of wrong with the world. And I guess I just wonder, sort of as a New Yorker, as a person that is trying to make change in government, sort of what this moment means for you. I mean, this is the day when the order's gone through, the clock starts ticking, $111,000 of interest accrues every single day that Donald Trump doesn't pay this. He seems to be having money problems. His lawyers are saying, can we push off the date by which we have to pay this, both here and in the E. Jean Carroll case? What does the moment feel like for you as you watch this all unfold?
You know, I think it's such an important moment, because in this country, in this moment, we as Americans have gotten so used to the wealthy committing financial crimes and fleecing working people and getting away with it time after time after time. That golf course that was there in Trump Links, just at the edge of it is NYCHA public housing. And you have people who can't even get adequate heat in the wintertime. that are up on a high-rise apartment or an apartment several, many feet up in the air, and they have to overlook this golf course that was subsidized with public resources when they can't even be sure that they're drinking water that doesn't have lead in it. And so to me, what this ruling finally starts to represent is that the buck is starting to stop here. Donald Trump has been able to play this shell game, and he's been able to swap one debt for another and one leverage for another. And now with this ruling, the state of New York is saying, you actually have to pay up now. And our hope is that with those assets, when we return them back to the public, that they can be used to further, not only further the good of the public, but also to send a message that this is a justice system that you cannot and should not buy your way out of. And for too long, the wealthy have. And so this is not just about Trump. I think this should be a message to all people who think that they can fleece this system and get away with behavior like this that comes at the cost of everyday working families.
It's so interesting that you say that, because the Trumps have said this decision is going to ruin New York. New York is over. By virtue of holding us accountable for bad behavior, fraudulent behavior, everyone's going to leave.
Right.
I don't know what that says about New York. I think we actually have the sound. Can we hear what Eric Trump had to say about his father's travails?
You have a lost state right now where you have businesses fleeing. And you have a company like ours that have paid over $300 million in taxes to a city. My father built the skyline of New York City. And this is the thanks he gets?
Just architecturally, I'd take issue with the idea that Donald Trump built the skyline, maybe like the Trump developments on the Upper West Side. But, I mean, what do you say to that? Because as much as it's sort of comic that the Trumps are saying the departure of Donald Trump's going to ruin New York, you can see how this line that New York is anti-business titan might have some resonance in certain circles. And I wonder what your response to that would be.
New York is so anti-business that Wall Street is located here, that Midtown Manhattan is soaring up Billionaires Row, that we have the top 1%, not only in the United States, but globally, constantly trying to purchase up and gobble up real estate here. Something tells me that that is full of hot air. And in fact, when we want to talk about New York City and who is leaving, there is such an interest in peddling this myth and this lie that having a fair and enforcing a fair tax system is causing the wealthy to flee, when the data actually shows that it's the opposite. Rent in New York City, just like across the rest of this country, has gotten out of control. Our housing crisis has gotten to such epic proportions that not just the poor, the working class, the middle class, upper middle class people can't even afford to live in the city anymore. If anyone is leaving, it is the actual people that make New York City work. It's the working class. And so, to Eric Trump, I'd say, you know what? You can let go a couple of those towers and maybe we turn them into public housing so people can actually afford to live here.
Put that on a mug. I do want to ask you, because we're talking about this moment where it seems like there's accountability, if not a downright reckoning. Are you worried at all about whether the criminal justice system will actually hold Donald Trump into account? And I want to ask you this as someone who survived January 6th. It was a viscerally terrifying moment from you, from the accounts you've shared publicly. It is something the House explored robustly through the January 6th committee, but something that the Department of Justice appeared sort of slow to take up in terms of its investigation and prosecution of Donald Trump. I do have extraordinary concern about it. Can you talk a little bit about, sort of, if you had a message to Merrick Garland in this moment as a Democrat who sort of understands what that moment meant for the country?
For me, it's not even as a Democrat, but it's as an American. Are we really going to see what happened on January 6th and not have serious consequence for it? If we do not issue, if there is not a clear proceeding that is swift, this is not just about an individual case. This is about the message that this sends for our democracy. And if there is not clarity on how unacceptable and how clear the crimes were that happened on January 6th and leading up to January 6th, then we are creating an open question about whether this is acceptable or not. And that cuts to the core, not just of our justice system, but to our democracy. And we are hurtling towards an election where you have a Donald Trump who is more desperate than he has ever been, particularly with this financial ruling, more financially desperate than he's ever been. He was hoarding classified documents about U.S. national security secrets in Mar-a-Lago. And we don't know the full extent. But what I believe is that Donald Trump would sell this country for $1 if he thinks that it would benefit himself. And when you have a settlement of over $400 million, we need to be really serious about the stakes of what's happening here.
Yeah, and find out if anybody posts bond for him, who those people actually are. Who has $500 million laying around?